Dog finds abandoned baby in the trash. What happened next will leave you speechless. In the industrial outskirts of Gary, Indiana, where forgotten dreams mingled with discarded memories, a small figure huddled between mountains of debris. 2-year-old Cody sat motionless, his oversized clothes hanging loose on his tiny frame, eyes fixed on the cloudy sky above. The cold ground seeped through his worn clothes, but he remained still, having learned early that, in this world, crying rarely brought comfort. The air was thick with the musty smell of dampness and decay, while scavenging birds circled overhead. The municipal landfill stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to everything society had deemed worthless. Yet among the broken furniture, abandoned toys and torn clothing, something extraordinary was about to unfold. A scruffy dog appeared through the maze of trash heaps, his fur matted and wearing the marks of countless hardships. This was Buddy, a name that seemed almost ironic given his rough appearance. He moved with careful steps, his nose twitching as he caught Cody's scent. The dog's approach was cautious, respectful even, as if he understood the delicate nature of their first encounter. As their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them. In that moment, two lost souls recognized something in each other, a shared loneliness, a desperate need for connection. Buddy didn't hesitate. He settled beside Cody, offering warmth and companionship without asking for anything in return. The boy's small hand reached out, touching the dog's fur with gentle curiosity. It was the first time since arriving at this desolate place that Cody didn't feel completely alone. Tom and Jack arrived at the landfill just as the sun began to set. Their pickup truck loaded with empty bags ready to be filled with recyclable materials. They had been doing this for years, searching through society's cast-offs for anything of value. Tom, with his kind eyes and weathered face, had seen many strange things in his years as a scavenger, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. "Jack, hold up," Tom called out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look over there." He pointed toward a particularly large pile of debris where something seemed out of place. Jack squinted in the fading light, following Tom's gesture. "What is it?" Jack asked, more focused on finishing their work before darkness fell completely. I think it's a child," Tom replied, his voice trembling slightly. He took a step forward, but stopped abruptly when a low growl emerged from the shadows. Buddy had positioned himself between the men and Cody, his protective instinct taking over. The dog's stance was clear. No one would approach the boy without proving their intentions were pure. Tom slowly raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "Easy there, boy," he said softly, taking another careful step forward. "We just want to help." Jack hung back, uncertainty written across his face. "Maybe we should call someone," he suggested, reaching for his phone. Sounds the authorities would know what to do, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about this situation. He'd seen this boy before, somewhere, but couldn't quite place where. The thought nagged at him as he continued his careful approach. Buddy's growl subsided slightly, but he remained vigilant. His eyes, though tired, held a fierce determination. The dog's loyalty to a child he'd just met spoke volumes about the depth of connection that can form between the most unlikely of companions. As Tom drew closer, he noticed something partially buried in the debris, a photograph, its edges worn and creased. Carefully, he retrieved it, brushing off the dirt. His breath caught in his throat as he studied the image, a woman with exhausted eyes wearing a threadbare coat, holding a smaller version of the boy before him. "Dear Jack," Tom called out, his voice urgent. "Come look at this." He held up the photograph, and even in the dimming light, the resemblance was undeniable. This was no random abandonment. There was a story here, one that Tom felt compelled to uncover. The evening air grew colder, and clouds gathered overhead, threatening rain. Cody shivered slightly, pressing closer to Buddy's warm fur. The dog responded by curling tighter around the boy, a living shield against the approaching storm. Tom made a decision then, one that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have predicted. He removed his jacket and slowly approached the pair again, this time holding out the warm garment as a peace offering. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle and steady. "Let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" Buddy looked up at Tom, then back at Cody, as if weighing the situation. After what seemed like an eternity, the dog's posture relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained alert. It was as if he understood that sometimes accepting help was the bravest thing one could do. As the first raindrops began to fall, Tom carefully wrapped his jacket around Cody's small frame. The boy didn't resist, but his hand remained firmly gripped in Buddy's fur, making it clear that wherever he was going, the dog would need to come too. Jack watched from a distance, his practical nature warring with his compassion. "What are you planning to do?" he asked, knowing his friend well enough to see that Tom had already made up his mind about something. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Tom carefully lifted Cody into his arms, Buddy rising to stand beside them. "First, we get them both out of this rain," Tom replied, his voice firm with resolve. "Then, we find out why this boy looks so familiar, and what happened to the woman in this photograph." As they made their way back to the truck, the rain began to fall in earnest, washing away the day's dust and grime. But it couldn't wash away the questions that now filled their minds, nor the strange sense that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than their usual salvage runs. The rain intensified as Tom's old pickup truck navigated through Gary's dimly lit streets. In the passenger seat, Cody sat quietly on Jack's lap, his small fingers still intertwined with Buddy's fur. The dog had somehow managed to squeeze himself into the cramped space between the seats, refusing to leave the boy's side even for a moment. Tom kept glancing at the photograph he'd found, now resting on the dashboard. There was something about the woman's face that tugged at his memory, like a half-remembered dream. He'd worked at the steel mill for over 2 decades before it closed down, and her face seemed connected to those years somehow. "We should take him to the police station," Jack suggested, breaking the heavy silence. "They'll know how to handle this." His practical nature always led him to seek the most straightforward solution, but Tom shook his head. "Not yet," Tom replied, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Something's not right here. That woman in the photo, I know her from somewhere." He turned down a side street, away from the direction of the police station. "We need to figure this out first." The truck pulled up in front of Tom's modest home, a small but well-maintained house that had seen better days. As they stepped out into the rain, lightning illuminated the neighborhood, causing Cody to press closer to Buddy. The dog remained steady, a constant source of comfort in the chaos. Inside, Tom's wife Sarah was preparing dinner when they entered. The sight of 2 men, a child, and a dirty dog dripping water on her clean floor stopped her in her tracks. "Tom?" she questioned, dish towel frozen in her hands. "Sarah, I need your help," Tom said, already moving to grab clean towels from the linen closet. "This is important." He handed her the photograph, now protected in a plastic sleeve he'd found in the truck. "Do you recognize her?" Sarah adjusted her reading glasses and studied the image. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Wait, isn't this Helen? Helen Marshall? She used to work in the mill's administrative office." She looked at Cody, who was now wrapped in a towel, and back at the photo. "And this must be her son." The name hit Tom like a physical force. Helen Marshall. Of course, she had been one of the last employees let go when the mill closed down 3 years ago. He remembered her quiet determination, how she'd worked extra hours even as the company was crumbling, trying to support her unborn child on her own. "What happened to her?" Jack asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Sarah. "Why would she—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice the obvious question in front of the child. Sarah moved to the kitchen, returning with some warm milk and cookies for Cody. The boy accepted them cautiously, sharing a cookie with Buddy, who took it with surprising gentleness. "The last I heard," Sarah continued, "Helen was struggling after the mill closed. She tried to find work, but with a baby on the way." She shook her head sadly. "Then she just disappeared. Everyone assumed she'd moved away to stay with family." Tom paced the living room, his mind racing. There has to be more to the story. Helen wasn't the type to just... He glanced at Cody, choosing his words carefully. She loved that boy more than anything. I remember how she used to talk about him, even before he was born. A knock at the door startled them all. Buddy immediately positioned himself between Cody and the entrance, his protective instincts on high alert. Tom approached the door cautiously, opening it to reveal Maria Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had lived in Gary longer than anyone else on the block. "I saw lights in your house and people coming in," she explained, her accent thick with concern. "Gary's everything okay?" Her eyes fell on Cody and Buddy, and her expression changed to one of recognition. "Dios mío, is that Helen's boy?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Maria. She entered, closing the door behind her, and sat down heavily in Tom's armchair. "I've seen them," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Helen and the boy. They were living in the old apartment building on Wilson Street. The one they're planning to tear down. Living there. "But that building was condemned months ago," Sarah exclaimed. Maria nodded gravely. "Many people with nowhere else to go still live there. I take food sometimes and when I can." Helen. She was there, trying to protect her boy, but last week, she paused, wringing her hands. "Last week, they took her to the hospital. She was very sick." And Buddy pressed closer to him in response. Tom looked at the clock. It was nearing 9 in the evening. "Sarah, can you and Maria stay with Cody and Buddy? Jack and I need to go to St. Catherine's. There might still be someone who can tell us what's going on." Sarah nodded, already moving to prepare the spare room. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed bear. "I keep this for when my grandchildren visit," she explained, offering it to Cody. The boy accepted it tentatively, holding it close along with Buddy's fur. As Tom and Jack prepared to leave, Buddy broke his vigil by Cody's side for the first time, walking to Tom and gently tugging at his pant leg. The message was clear. Find her, help her, make this right. "We'll be back soon," Tom promised, looking at them all. "And hopefully, we'll have some answers." The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the warm house, a small boy who had been alone in the world just hours ago was now surrounded by people determined to help him. And through it all, Buddy remained by his side, a guardian angel in dog form, watching and waiting for the next chapter of their story to unfold. St. Catherine's Hospital loomed before them, its windows gleaming like tired eyes in the rainy night. Tom and Jack hurried through the entrance, their clothes still damp from the earlier downpour. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the nearly empty waiting room, where a lone receptionist looked up from her computer screen. "Visiting hours are over," she stated automatically, but Tom stepped forward, his expression determined. "Please, we're looking for information about Helen Marshall. She was admitted last week." Tom's voice carried an urgency that made the receptionist pause. "We found her son." The mention of a child changed the receptionist's demeanor immediately. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Wait here." She disappeared through a door behind the desk, returning moments later with a middle-aged nurse whose ID badge read, Patricia Williams. Patricia ushered them into a small consultation room, closing the door carefully behind them. "You said you found Helen Marshall's son." Her eyes searched their faces, concern evident in her expression. "Where was he?" Tom explained their discovery at the landfill, watching as Patricia's face grew increasingly troubled. When he finished, she sank into a chair, shaking her head slowly. "Helen has been asking for her son since she arrived," Patricia revealed, her voice heavy with emotion. "She was severely weakened when they brought her in. Malnutrition, exhaustion, and a serious respiratory infection. But all she could talk about was protecting Cody." "Protecting him from what?" Jack asked, leaning forward in his chair. Patricia hesitated, then reached for a file on the nearby desk. Helen shared some details in her more lucid moments. She used to work at the steel mill, handling their financial records. Apparently, she discovered something irregular in the books before the closure. Something that certain people wanted to keep hidden. Tom's mind raced back to the mill's final days, the rushed closure, the missing pension funds, the workers left with nothing. "Corporate fraud," he suggested, the pieces starting to fall into place. Patricia nodded. She said she had evidence, documents that could prove what happened to all that money. But when she tried to report it, she started receiving threats. She was pregnant with Cody at the time, so she went into hiding instead of fighting. That's why she disappeared, Tom murmured, remembering how abruptly Helen had left. She was protecting both herself and her unborn child. Where is she now? Jack asked. But the way Patricia's face fell told them everything before she spoke. She took a turn for the worse yesterday, Patricia explained gently. We had to transfer her to the intensive care unit. She's stable now, but very weak. Before that happened, though, she gave me something to keep safe. The nurse reached into her pocket and withdrew a small key. She said it opens a locker at the bus station. She was desperate for someone to understand. She didn't abandon her son. She was trying to find a way to expose the truth while keeping him safe. Tom took the key, its weight feeling far heavier than its small size would suggest. Can we see her? Patricia stood, straightening her uniform. Follow me. But please. Just a few minutes. She needs her rest. They followed the nurse through quiet corridors until they reached the ICU. Through the window, they could see Helen, pale and frail against the white sheets, but still fighting. Patricia allowed Tom to enter alone while Jack kept watch outside. Tom approached Helen's bed quietly, noticing how young she still looked despite everything she'd been through. Her eyes fluttered open as he drew near, taking a moment to focus on his face. Tom? Her voice was barely a whisper. From the mill. Yes, Helen, we found Cody. He watched as relief flooded her features. He's safe. We have him at my house, with my wife Sarah, and he has a protector, a dog named Buddy who hasn't left his side. Tears slipped from Helen's eyes. Thank God, she breathed. I didn't want to leave him there, but I was so sick. I couldn't risk him getting ill too. I thought if I could just get some help. Get stronger. Her voice cracked with emotion. The key, Tom said gently, showing it to her. Patricia told us about the documents. Helen's hand gripped his with surprising strength. You have to expose them, Tom. What they did to all those workers, all those families. The evidence is there. But Cody, promise me you'll keep him safe until this is over. I promise, Tom replied firmly. You focus on getting better. We'll handle everything else. A ghost of a smile crossed Helen's face as her eyes began to drift closed. The dog, she murmured. Buddy. He used to visit me and Cody at the old building. Always brought him little gifts, food he'd found, toys. Like he knew we needed help. Her voice trailed off as she fell into an exhausted sleep. Tom left the room with a new understanding of both Helen's strength and the complexity of the situation they'd stumbled into. Jack was waiting in the hallway, his expression questioning. We need to go to the bus station, Tom said as they walked back through the quiet hospital corridors. But first, we should check on Cody and let Sarah know what's happening. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Tom couldn't help but wonder about Buddy's role in all of this. The dog hadn't just found Cody by chance. He'd been watching over both mother and son all along, like a guardian angel in disguise. And now, somehow, he'd led them all together, as if orchestrating a plan to make things right. The weight of the key in Tom's pocket reminded him that their night was far from over. Whatever was in that locker had been important enough for Helen to risk everything to protect. Now it was their turn to help her finish what she'd started, not just for her and Cody, but for all the families who'd lost everything when the mill closed its doors. The old bus station stood like a forgotten sentinel in the heart of Gary, its weathered walls telling stories of better days. Tom and Jack arrived just before midnight, their footsteps echoing through the nearly empty terminal. A few scattered passengers dozed on hard plastic seats, waiting for late-night buses that would carry them away from this struggling city. Locker sections over there, Jack pointed, his voice hushed in the cavernous space. They made their way past rows of metal lockers, many covered in years of dust and neglect. Tom pulled out the key Helen had given them, studying the number etched on its surface, 247. They found it in a corner, partially hidden behind a defunct vending machine. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key. The lock turned with a resistant screech, and the door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside, they found a weathered leather briefcase, its surface cracked and worn. Tom lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of what he knew must be Helen's evidence. But there was something else, a small, worn envelope with Cody's name written in careful handwriting. "We should get back," Jack suggested, glancing around nervously. "I don't like the feeling of this place at night." Tom nodded, tucking both items securely under his arm. As they turned to leave, a shadow moved near the station's entrance. Both men froze, but it was only a security guard making his rounds. They nodded to him casually as they passed, trying to appear as normal as possible. The drive back to Tom's house was tense with anticipation. Neither man spoke, both lost in thoughts about what the briefcase might contain. When they pulled into the driveway, they noticed Sarah standing at the window, waiting for them. Inside, the scene that greeted them brought a moment of unexpected warmth to their serious mission. Cody was asleep on the living room couch, curled up against Buddy's furry body. The dog's eyes opened as they entered, alert but calm. Maria sat nearby in an armchair, knitting what appeared to be a small sweater. "He finally fell asleep about an hour ago," Sarah whispered, meeting them in the kitchen. "That dog hasn't moved an inch. Even though I'm sure he must be hungry and thirsty, he just keeps watching over him." Tom placed the briefcase and envelope on the kitchen table. "How has Cody been?" "Quiet, but not scared," Sarah replied. "He ate some soup, and Maria got him to smile a little with some stories. He keeps asking for his mama, though." She looked at the items on the table. "Did you find out anything at the hospital?" Tom shared everything they'd learned about Helen's discovery and her reasons for hiding. As he spoke, Jack carefully opened the briefcase, spreading its contents across the table. Inside were folders filled with financial documents, internal memos, and what appeared to be copies of emails. "Look at this," Jack said, holding up a particular document. "It shows how they created fake accounts to siphon off pension funds before declaring bankruptcy. They knew they were going to close the mill months before they told anyone." Sarah picked up another paper, her eyes widening. "These are transfer records. They moved millions into offshore accounts while telling everyone there wasn't enough money to keep operating." Tom opened the envelope with Cody's name, finding a letter written in Helen's neat handwriting. As he read it silently, his expression softened. She wrote this for him, explaining everything. She wanted him to know she never abandoned him, that everything she did was to protect him and fight for justice. A small sound made them all turn. Cody stood in the kitchen doorway, Buddy right beside him. The boy's eyes were fixed on the photograph of his mother that had fallen from the envelope. Tom knelt down to Cody's level. "Hey, Buddy," he said softly. "Your mum is very brave, you know that, and she loves you very much." He held out the photograph and Cody took it carefully, holding it close to his chest. "Want Mama," Cody said softly, his voice stronger than before. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah replied, moving to comfort him. "And we're going to help you see her soon. But first, we need to help her finish something very important." Maria stood up, gathering her knitting. "I should go home, but I'll be back in the morning to help with Cody." She patted the boy's head gently. "Don't worry, Pequeño. Everything will be better soon." After she left, they gathered around the kitchen table, spreading out the documents while Cody dozed in Sarah's lap. Buddy maintained his vigilant watch, but his posture was more relaxed now, as if he sensed they were getting closer to making things right. "We need to take this to someone who can help," Jack said, organizing the papers into neat piles. "Someone who can't be bought off or scared away." Tom nodded, remembering something from his union days. "I might know someone, a lawyer who used to help with workers' rights cases. She's tough, and she has connections with the state attorney's office." As they discussed their next steps, a soft rain began to fall outside, drumming gently on the roof. The sound seemed to soothe Cody, who had drifted back to sleep. The sight of the small boy, clutching his mother's photograph even in sleep, strengthened their resolve. They had the evidence now, proof of the corruption that had destroyed so many lives in their community, but more importantly, they had a chance to help a mother and son reunite, to make right what had gone so terribly wrong. As the night deepened, they continued their work, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and, hopefully, the beginning of justice. Buddy shifted slightly, resting his head on Cody's knee, his brown eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond human understanding. He had brought them all together, piece by piece, like a master plan unfolding. Now, in the quiet kitchen of Tom's house, the next phase of their journey was taking shape. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Diana Chen's law office as Tom and Sarah presented Helen's documents. The lawyer's reputation for taking on corporate giants was well known in Gary, and her office, though modest, displayed numerous framed newspaper articles about her victories against powerful adversaries. Diana adjusted her glasses, methodically reviewing each piece of evidence. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes sparked with increasing interest as she turned each page. Cody sat quietly in Sarah's lap, Buddy stationed faithfully by their side. The dog had refused to stay home, somehow sensing the importance of this meeting. "This is extremely compelling evidence," Diana finally said, placing the last document down carefully. "The detailed records of fund transfers, the internal communications, the falsified reports, it's all here. Helen Marshall did an incredible job documenting everything." "Can you help us?" Tom asked, leaning forward in his chair. "These people didn't just steal money, they destroyed lives, and now Helen's fighting for her life in the hospital, while her little boy—" His voice trailed off as he glanced at Cody. Diana stood, pacing behind her desk. "We need to move quickly but carefully. If what these documents show is true, and I believe it is, we're dealing with people who won't hesitate to use their power and influence to stop us." "What's our first step?" Sarah asked, unconsciously holding Cody closer. "First, we need to ensure Helen and Cody's safety," Diana replied firmly. "I'm going to contact Judge Martinez. She's been looking for a case like this to crack down on corporate fraud. We can request an emergency protective order for both Helen and Cody." As they discussed strategy, Buddy's ears suddenly perked up. He moved to the office window, letting out a low growl. Diana quickly moved to peek through the blinds, her face tightening. "There's a black SUV that's passed by 3 times in the last few minutes." Tom joined her at the window. "Could be coincidence." "In my line of work, there are no coincidences," Diana said, already reaching for her phone. "We need to move now. I have a safe house where I sometimes keep witnesses. We should get Helen transferred there as soon as possible." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Diana's efficiency was impressive as she set her plan in motion. She arranged for Helen's transfer to a private medical facility, filed emergency motions with the court, and coordinated with trusted contacts in law enforcement. "I'm sending my associate, Marcus, with you to the hospital," Diana explained, handing Tom a folder of documents. "He'll handle the transfer paperwork. Sarah, you and Cody should go to the safe house now. It's a comfortable apartment above my friend's bookstore in Highland. She's been helping me protect witnesses for years." As if understanding the gravity of the situation, Buddy stayed closer than ever to Cody, his protective instincts on high alert. The dog's presence seemed to calm the boy, who had grown increasingly anxious as he sensed the tension around him. Before they left the office, Diana pulled Tom aside. "There's something else you should know. While reviewing the documents, I found references to other mills in the region. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a systematic scheme. Helen uncovered something much bigger than just one factory's closure." Tom felt the weight of this revelation settle on his shoulders. No wonder they were so desperate to keep her quiet. "Exactly," Diana nodded. "But now we have what we need to expose everything. I'm going to contact the state attorney's office and the federal prosecutor. This is going to be big, Tom. Really big." As they prepared to leave, following Diana's carefully planned exit strategy, Buddy suddenly stopped near her desk. The dog nosed at her bottom drawer, whining softly. Diana opened it, puzzled, and found an old newspaper clipping she'd forgotten about. It detailed the suspicious fire at another mill 2 states over, just before it was due for a financial audit. "Incredible," she whispered, adding the clipping to their evidence file. "This dog, he's been leading us every step of the way," Sarah said softly, watching as Buddy returned to Cody's side. "Like he understands everything that's happening." They split up as planned, Tom and Marcus heading to the hospital, Sarah and Cody leaving for the safe house, and Diana staying behind to set the legal machinery in motion. As they parted ways, The gravity of what they were undertaking hung heavy in the air. In the car, Sarah watched through the rearview mirror as Cody held his mother's photograph, Buddy's head resting protectively on his lap. The boy seemed to understand that something important was happening, something that would change everything. "We're going to see Mama soon?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her hands steady on the wheel as she followed Diana's careful directions to the safe house. "Very soon, and this time you'll be together for good." Buddy lifted his head and licked Cody's cheek, as if confirming her words. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across Gary's streets. Somewhere in those shadows, powerful people were about to discover that their carefully hidden secrets were no longer safe. The truth was finally coming to light, carried forward by the unlikely alliance of a loyal dog, a brave mother, and a group of people who refused to look the other way. The old bookstore in Highland stood like a remnant from another era, its brick facade weathered but dignified. Inside, the scent of old books and brewing coffee created a comforting atmosphere. Louise, the elderly owner, led Sarah, Cody, and Buddy up a narrow staircase to the apartment above. "Everything's ready," Louise said. Buddy immediately began a careful inspection of the space, his nose working overtime as he checked every corner and window. His methodical approach reminded Sarah of a trained security professional rather than a former stray. "That's quite a remarkable dog you have there," Louise observed, watching Buddy complete his rounds before settling near Cody. "In all my years helping Diana, I've never seen anything quite like him." Sarah smiled, watching as Cody explored the apartment, never straying far from his faithful companion. "He's been our guardian angel through all of this. Sometimes I wonder if he's something more than just a dog." Louise nodded sagely, moving to the kitchen to prepare some tea. "Animals often see things we don't, dear. They understand truths we can barely grasp." Meanwhile, across town, Tom and Marcus arrived at St. Catherine's Hospital. Diana's careful planning had paid off. They found Helen already being prepared for transfer, with 2 trusted police officers stationed outside her room. "The judge signed the protection order," Marcus explained as they waited, "and Diana's contact at the FBI has opened a preliminary investigation based on the documents. Things are moving faster than we expected." Tom watched through the window as nurses helped Helen into a wheelchair. Despite her weakness, there was new energy in her movements, hope bringing color back to her cheeks. When they entered the room, her eyes immediately sought Tom's. "Cody?" she asked, her voice stronger than the night before. "Safe," Tom assured her. "Sarah has him at Diana's safe house. Buddy's with them too, hasn't left Cody's side for a moment." Tears welled in Helen's eyes. "I keep thinking about him out there in that terrible place. If Buddy hadn't found him." "If you hadn't come along." "Don't," Tom said gently. "Focus on getting stronger. You're going to see him very soon." As they prepared to leave, a commotion erupted in the hallway. One of the police officers stepped in quickly. "We need to move now. There are 2 men at the front desk asking questions about Miss Marshall. They're claiming to be from corporate security." Marcus immediately pulled out his phone, updating Diana while Tom helped the nurses transfer Helen into the transport wheelchair. They moved swiftly through the back corridors of the hospital, following the route Diana had arranged. In the safe house, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Company showed up, taking alternate route. Stay alert." Buddy's head lifted at Sarah's sharp intake of breath, his ears forward and alert. Louise, who had been showing Cody her collection of children's books, caught Sarah's expression. "Is everything all right, dear?" "They're making their move," Sarah replied quietly, trying to keep her voice calm for Cody's sake. "They know something's happening." Louise nodded, her cheerful demeanor never wavering. "Well then, let's make sure we're ready for anything." She moved to the windows, quietly drawing the curtains. "Cody, sweetheart, would you like to help me bake some cookies? Your mama might be here soon, and we should have something special waiting." As Cody eagerly followed Louise to the kitchen, Buddy positioned himself near the apartment's entrance, his posture alert but calm. Sarah watched him, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. Back in the hospital parking lot, Tom helped ease Helen into the unmarked medical transport van. As Marcus closed the doors, they spotted two men in dark suits emerging from the hospital's main entrance, looking around urgently. "Go," Tom urged the driver. "We'll follow in my truck." The van pulled away just as the men noticed them. Tom and Marcus walked calmly to Tom's pickup, watched the suits hurry to their SUV. As they drove away, Tom took a series of random turns through Gary's streets, making sure they weren't being followed before heading toward Highland. In the safe house, Cody suddenly stopped helping Louise with the cookies. He walked to the window, pressed his small hand against the glass, and said clearly, "Mama coming." Buddy moved to join him, tail wagging slowly. Sarah and Louise exchanged glances. They hadn't received any message about Helen's arrival yet, but something in Cody's certainty and Buddy's response made them believe. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In the growing shadows, a mother was making her way back to her son, protected by an unlikely group of guardians. And at the center of it all was Buddy, the mysterious stray who had somehow known exactly what needed to be done, bringing together all the right people at exactly the right time. Louise began humming softly as she helped Cody place cookies on the baking sheet, her calm presence helping to ease the tension. Sarah kept her phone close, waiting for news, while Buddy maintained his vigilant watch. They were all part of something bigger now, a fight for justice, a story of reunion, and a testament to the extraordinary bonds that can form between the most unlikely of allies. The medical transport van wound its way through Highland's quiet streets as dusk settled over the town. Inside, Helen gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her heart racing not from illness but from anticipation. After what felt like an eternity of separation, she was finally going to hold her son again. Tom's pickup followed at a discreet distance, his experienced eyes scanning for any sign of the dark SUV. But the streets remained peaceful, filled only with the ordinary traffic of people heading home for the evening. Marcus sat beside him, coordinating with Diana through carefully coded text messages. "Diana says the FBI is moving faster than expected," Marcus reported, his voice low. "They're particularly interested in the connection to the other mill fires. Apparently, Helen's evidence was the missing piece they've been looking for." At the bookstore, Louise had just pulled a fresh batch of cookies from the oven when Buddy suddenly stood at attention. His tail began to wag slowly and he gave a soft whine. Moments later, they heard the subtle sound of a vehicle pulling into the back alley. "They're here," Sarah whispered, moving to the window. She watched as the van backed up to the store's rear entrance, exactly as Diana had planned. Tom's truck appeared moments later, parking at the far end of the alley as a lookout. Louise quickly guided them through the shop's back room, where a hidden staircase led directly to the apartment above. Sarah held Cody's hand, feeling him tremble with excitement. Buddy stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring. The sound of careful footsteps on the stairs seemed to stretch time itself. Then, finally, the door opened and Helen appeared, supported by a nurse but standing on her own feet. She had insisted on walking these last few steps to her son. "Mama!" Cody's voice broke the suspended silence. He ran forward as Helen dropped to her knees, gathering him into her arms. They held each other tightly, both crying and laughing at the same time, their words tumbling out in a mixture of sobs and joy. Buddy approached slowly, his tail wagging gently. Helen looked up, tears streaming down her face. "You wonderful, wonderful dog," she whispered, reaching out to touch his fur. "You kept him safe. You brought him back to me." The dog pressed his head against her hand, then settled beside them both, completing their small family circle. The others moved quietly to give them space, though Tom remained near the window, ever vigilant. As the evening deepened, they gathered in Louise's cozy living room. The smell of fresh cookies filled the air, and Cody refused to leave his mother's lap, even to eat. Helen looked exhausted but happy, her fingers constantly running through her son's hair, as if reassuring herself that he was really there. "Diana called while you were on your way," Louise said, serving tea. "The FBI has placed your evidence in secure custody. They're particularly interested in the financial records, showing connections between all the mill closures." Helen nodded, her expression growing serious. It wasn't just about stealing pension funds. They were destroying communities systematically, buying up the land after everything collapsed. I found evidence of similar patterns in 5 other cities. But why? Sarah asked, passing Helen a plate of cookies. Real estate development, Helen explained. They had plans drawn up before the mills even closed. Luxury condos, shopping centers, all built on land they got for pennies after destroying the local economy. She hugged Cody closer. When I realized how big it was, I knew I had to hide. These people, they've done terrible things to protect their secrets. Tom moved from his post by the window. Well, they can't hide anymore. Diana says the federal prosecutor is treating this as a priority case. They're already following the money trail you uncovered. A soft scratching sound drew their attention. Buddy was pawing at Helen's bag, which had been placed near the couch. Helen reached for it, curious. Inside, she found a folder she hadn't seen before, stuck to the bottom of the bag. "This isn't mine," she said, opening it carefully. Her eyes widened as she reviewed its contents. "Okay, these are insurance documents. For the mill fires, how did—" Everyone looked at Buddy, who sat calmly, watching them with those knowing eyes. Once again, he had somehow led them to exactly what they needed. "I don't think we'll ever understand how he does it," Sarah said softly. "But I'm starting to believe he was meant to bring us all together." Louise nodded sagely. "Some things in this world don't need explaining. They just need to be accepted as the miracles they are." As night fell outside, they began making plans for the days ahead. Diana had arranged for Helen and Cody to stay in the apartment until the immediate legal proceedings were completed. Tom and Sarah would remain nearby, helping Louise keep watch, while Jack coordinated with other former mill workers who might have additional evidence to share. Through it all, Buddy maintained his position near the small family, his presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Helen reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he leaned into her touch. "I used to see him sometimes, you know," she said quietly. "When we were hiding in the old building, he would appear with food or toys for Cody. I never knew where he came from, but he always seemed to show up when we needed help the most." Cody, growing sleepy in his mother's arms, reached out to pat Buddy's head. "My angel," he murmured, using words that seemed beyond his years. The room fell quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts about the mysterious dog who had orchestrated their unlikely alliance. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like distant witnesses to the unfolding story of justice, reunion, and the inexplicable ways that love finds its path home. Dawn broke over Highland, painting the bookstore's old brick walls in soft golden light. Inside the apartment, Helen watched her son sleep peacefully, Buddy maintaining his faithful vigil at the foot of the bed. The past few days had brought more hope than she'd felt in years, but also a growing sense that their challenges were far from over. Diana arrived early that morning, her usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. She gathered everyone in the living room, speaking in hushed tones to avoid waking Cody. "The FBI has moved quickly with the evidence," she began, spreading papers across Louise's coffee table, "but our opponents are moving too. 3 former mill executives have suddenly left the country, and there have been attempts to access Helen's old computer records at the mill." Tom leaned forward, his face grim. "They're trying to cover their tracks." "Yes, but they're getting sloppy," Diana replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Every move they make creates new evidence. The insurance documents Buddy found were crucial. They proved the fires weren't accidents. The federal prosecutor is preparing RICO charges." Sarah, who had been watching through the window, suddenly stiffened. "That black SUV is back. It just drove past for the second time." Buddy's ears perked up, and he moved silently to the window, his posture alert but not aggressive. Helen instinctively went to check on Cody, who still slept soundly in the next room. "We expected this," Diana said calmly, though her eyes showed concern. "They're getting desperate, but we've prepared for it." She pulled out her phone, sending a quick text. "I have 2 plainclothes officers watching the store, and Judge Martinez signed additional protection orders this morning." Louise appeared with fresh coffee and her characteristic unflappable demeanor. In all my years helping Diana's witnesses, I've learned that sunlight is the best disinfectant. The more they try to hide, the more attention they draw to themselves. As if to prove her point, Tom's phone buzzed with a message from Jack. "You need to see this," it read, followed by a link to the local news website. They gathered around as Tom opened it, revealing a breaking story about suspicious financial patterns in mill closures across the Midwest. "It's starting," Diana said, a note of triumph in her voice. "The media has picked up the trail. Once this gets national attention, they won't be able to stop it." A small sound from the bedroom doorway drew their attention. Cody stood there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mama!" he called, his voice tinged with anxiety. Helen went to him immediately, scooping him up in her arms. "I'm right here, baby. Everything's okay." Buddy followed, pressing against Helen's legs in a gesture of support. "The nice thing about books," Louise said suddenly, moving to her shelves, "is that they're excellent at keeping secrets." She pulled a volume from the shelf, revealing a hidden panel behind it. "This leads to the building next door, just in case we need options." Diana nodded approvingly. "I've arranged for a safe house in Michigan, if needed, but I don't think it will come to that. The evidence is too strong, and too many people are watching now." As they discussed contingency plans, Buddy suddenly left his post by the window and went to the hidden panel. He pawed at it gently, then looked at Louise. "Does he want to explore it?" Sarah asked, but Louise shook her head. "I think he wants us to check something." She opened the panel wider, revealing a narrow passage. This used to be part of the Underground Railroad. There are still old documents hidden in some of the walls. Tom and Marcus followed Louise into the passage with flashlights. They returned minutes later with a dusty metal box. Inside, they found ledgers dating back decades, showing a pattern of land acquisitions following business closures throughout the region. "This is incredible," Diana breathed, examining the documents. "This shows they've been using the same tactics for generations, forcing businesses to close, buying up the land cheap, then redeveloping it for massive profits." Helen studied the ledgers, her financial expertise spotting patterns others might miss. "Look at these names. They're shell companies, but they all lead back to the same family, the same people who owned the mill." As they pieced together this new evidence, Cody tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Buddy knew," he said simply, pointing at the dog who sat watching them with those wise, knowing eyes. The adults exchanged glances, once again struck by the mysterious nature of their four-legged guardian. How had he known about the hidden documents? How had he understood their importance? "There's an old saying," Louise mused, gently returning the ledgers to their box. "When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Perhaps when justice is ready to be served, a guide appears as well." The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the stained glass windows and creating patterns on the wooden floor. Outside, the black SUV made another pass, but now it seemed less threatening, more like the last desperate moves of those who knew their time was running out. Helen held Cody close, watching as Buddy returned to his post by the window. In the dog's alert but calm demeanor, she saw their own story reflected, one of perseverance, protection, and the unexpected ways that truth finds its way into the light. Diana gathered her papers, her expression determined. "We'll file the additional evidence today. With these historical records, we can show this wasn't just corporate fraud, it was a long-term conspiracy to destroy communities for profit. They won't be able to hide anymore." As their protectors discussed next steps, Helen noticed Buddy's tail begin to wag slightly, as if he already knew how the story would end. In that moment, despite the shadows still lurking outside, she felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together, guided by the extraordinary dog who had brought them all together. The afternoon brought dark clouds and the first drops of what promised to be a powerful storm. Inside the bookstore apartment, the atmosphere was equally charged with anticipation. Diana had just received word that federal agents were executing search warrants at corporate offices across 3 states. "They're moving faster than we expected," Diana explained, pacing the room with nervous energy. "The historical evidence we found in the passage was the key. The prosecutor says it's unprecedented. They've never seen such a clear pattern of systematic community destruction for profit. Helen sat with Cody on her lap, Buddy at their feet. As they watched raindrops trace patterns on the windows, the dog's calm presence helped steady her nerves, even as she processed the magnitude of what was unfolding. The media's running with the story, Marcus reported, monitoring news feeds on his laptop. National networks are picking it up. They're calling it the Great American Mill Scheme. Social media is exploding with similar stories from other communities. Louise appeared with fresh tea and her homemade scones, maintaining an air of normalcy despite the tension. The best stories, she said, setting down the tray, are the ones where truth finally catches up to lies. It just needs brave people to help it along. Suddenly, Buddy's head snapped up, his ears forward. Before anyone could react, he moved swiftly to Cody and Helen, positioning himself in front of them. Seconds later, they heard footsteps on the back stairs, too heavy to be Tom or Sarah, who had gone to meet with other former mill workers. Diana immediately moved toward the hidden panel, but Louise raised her hand. "Wait," she said softly, a knowing look in her eyes. "Listen." The footsteps stopped at the door, followed by 3 sharp knocks. Marcus moved cautiously to the security monitor they'd installed, then broke into a relieved smile. "It's Agent Rebecca Chen, Diana's sister from the FBI." Diana quickly opened the door to reveal a woman in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of controlled urgency. "We need to move fast," Rebecca announced, stepping inside. "What we found in the corporate offices, it's bigger than anyone imagined." She opened her briefcase, spreading photographs and documents across the table. The mill scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. We found evidence of judicial bribes, political payoffs, even connections to environmental crimes. They weren't just destroying communities, they were poisoning them to force people out. Buddy moved closer to the table, his nose twitching as he examined the documents. Helen watched in amazement as he pored at specific papers, almost as if he was highlighting the most important pieces. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pulling out the documents Buddy had indicated. "These show payments to local officials to suppress environmental testing results. And here, proof they deliberately contaminated water sources to drive down property values." "They made it impossible for people to stay," Helen whispered, the full scope of the conspiracy finally becoming clear. "Then bought everything for nothing when people had no choice but to leave." Cody, who had been quietly playing with his toys, suddenly spoke up. "Bad people hurt everyone," he said with the simple clarity of a child, "but Buddy found good people to help." The adults paused, struck by the profound truth in his words. The dog looked up at the mention of his name, his eyes seeming to hold wisdom beyond understanding. "Speaking of help," Rebecca continued, "we have more arriving soon. The prosecutor wants to move you all to a secure location tonight. We're announcing the first wave of indictments tomorrow morning, and we can't risk any last-minute attempts to silence witnesses." As if on cue, they heard cars pulling up outside. Louise moved to her security cameras, then smiled. "It's Tom and Sarah, and they've brought company. Looks like half the former mill workers are with them." Indeed, the street below had filled with familiar faces, people who had lost their jobs, their savings, their hopes when the mill closed. They formed a protective circle around the building, a silent vigil against any who might wish harm to those who had exposed the truth. Buddy went to the window, his tail wagging as he watched the gathering below. There was something profound in the sight, a community coming together, standing against those who had tried to destroy it. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Rebecca admitted, watching the scene unfold. "Usually, witnesses feel isolated, afraid. But this..." She gestured to the growing crowd outside. "This is something different." Helen held Cody closer, tears in her eyes as she recognized faces in the crowd. Former co-workers, neighbors, people who had suffered alongside her. "They were counting on our silence," she said softly. "They thought fear would keep us apart. They never expected a dog to bring us all together," Louise finished, reaching down to pat Buddy's head. "Sometimes the greatest changes come from the most unexpected sources." As the storm intensified outside, the room filled with a sense of impending victory. The truth was emerging, justice was approaching, and a community was healing, all because of a mysterious stray dog who had somehow known exactly what needed to be done. Diana's phone buzzed with updates from her contacts in law enforcement. "They're already making arrests in Chicago and Detroit," she reported. "The whole network is coming down at once." Through it all, Buddy maintained his quiet vigilance, moving between the window and his chosen family, as if conducting an orchestra of justice that only he could hear. The storm raged on, but inside, they were safe, protected by the bonds of community and the unwavering dedication of their remarkable guardian. The next morning broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. News vans lined the streets of Highland, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Inside the bookstore apartment, Helen watched the television with Cody nestled against her, as headlines scrolled across the screen. Massive corporate conspiracy exposed, federal raids across 5 states, Milltown justice. Buddy sat alert by their feet, his calm presence a stark contrast to the media frenzy outside. Diana paced the room, coordinating with her sister Rebecca as reports of arrests continued to pour in. "The chairman of the board was just taken into custody in Switzerland," Rebecca announced, hanging up her phone. "Interpol coordinated with us. He thought he could hide in his ski chalet, but they were waiting for him." Louise served breakfast, maintaining her usual grace even as history unfolded around them. "The best revenge," she said, setting down a plate of warm muffins. "Ick is living well and seeing justice served with morning tea." Tom and Sarah arrived with more news from the community. The former mill workers had organized an impromptu gathering in the town square, sharing stories with reporters and supporting each other. The wall of silence had finally crumbled. "People are coming forward from other towns too," Tom reported, accepting a cup of coffee from Louise. "Same pattern everywhere. Mills closed, communities destroyed, land bought cheap, but now they're speaking out." Suddenly, Buddy's ears perked up, and he moved to the window with purpose. Outside, a familiar figure was making her way through the crowd of reporters. Judge Martinez, her robes billowing in the morning breeze. "She didn't have to come personally," Diana said, surprised. "She could have sent a clerk with the documents." "Some moments deserve a personal touch," Louise replied, already moving to escort the judge up through the shop. When Judge Martinez entered the apartment, her presence brought an air of formal gravity to the cozy space. "Mrs. Marshall," she addressed Helen directly, "I wanted to deliver this myself." She produced an official document from her portfolio. "This is a full protection order, permanently preventing any retaliation against you or your son. It's being replicated for all witnesses in the case." Helen accepted the document with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge wasn't finished. She knelt down to Cody's level, smiling warmly. "Young man, your mother is very brave. She helped a lot of people by telling the truth." Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned to Buddy. "And you, remarkable friend, seem to be at the heart of this whole story." Buddy met the judge's gaze with dignified attention, as if acknowledging her recognition of his role. Cody beamed proudly, hugging his faithful companion. "There's something else," Judge Martinez continued, standing. "The prosecutor's office has established a victims' compensation fund. The seized assets from the conspiracy will be used to help rebuild the affected communities. The mill workers will get their pensions back." The news hit like a wave of hope through the room. Tom sat down heavily, overcome with emotion. Sarah squeezed his hand, both thinking of their friends and neighbors who had lost so much. "But how?" Helen asked, still struggling to believe in this sudden turn of fortune. "The evidence trail you uncovered led to offshore accounts, hidden assets, real estate holdings, billions of dollars hidden away," Rebecca explained. "When we followed Buddy's leads to those historical documents, it gave us everything we needed to freeze and seize it all." As if understanding he was being discussed, Buddy moved to the center of the room, his tail wagging gently. Everyone fell silent, once again struck by the extraordinary nature of this seemingly ordinary dog who had orchestrated an entire conspiracy's downfall. "I've been a judge for 20 years, Judge Martinez mused. watching Buddy with wondering eyes. "And I've never seen anything quite like this. A stray dog who finds abandoned children, uncovers evidence, protects witnesses, and brings an entire community together." Louise smiled knowingly. "Perhaps he's not a stray at all, but a guardian sent exactly when we needed one most." Through the window, they could hear the crowd outside growing larger. More community members were gathering. Drawn by the news of justice finally being served, the media crews were interviewing former mill workers, each story adding to the larger narrative of corruption exposed and communities fighting back. Cody slipped off his mother's lap and wrapped his arms around Buddy's neck. "My angel," he said again, with that same strange wisdom that seemed beyond his years. Helen joined them on the floor, enveloping both her son and their remarkable protector in a hug. "Our angel," she corrected gently. "Everyone's angel." The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the scene. Outside, a community was beginning to heal, brought together by truth and justice. Inside, a small group of people watched in wonder as their world transformed, guided by the mysterious wisdom of a dog who had somehow known exactly how to make everything right. 1 month after the arrests, Gary and its surrounding communities were showing signs of rebirth. The old mill site, once a symbol of loss and betrayal, had been transformed into a hub of activity. Construction crews worked to convert it into a community center, funded by the recovered assets. The building would house job training programs, childcare facilities, and support services for families affected by the conspiracy. Helen stood at the site's entrance, watching workers install new windows that caught the morning light. Cody played nearby with other children from the neighborhood, their laughter a sound that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. Buddy, as always, kept a watchful eye on his young charge, while maintaining a protective perimeter around the playing children. "Still hard to believe sometimes, isn't it?" Tom asked, joining Helen with a cup of coffee. He had been appointed to the Community Oversight Committee, ensuring the reconstruction funds were used properly. A month ago, this place was a reminder of everything we'd lost. Now it's bringing people hope. Sarah approached with a stack of papers, her role as project coordinator keeping her busy. "The first job training programs start next week," she reported. "We've already got a waiting list. People are ready to rebuild their lives." Diana's law firm had opened a new branch office across the street, dedicated to helping community members navigate the compensation process and protect their rights. Through the office window, they could see her meeting with former mill workers, her commitment to justice unwavering. Louise had expanded her bookstore's operations, adding a community reading room where children gathered for storytelling sessions. She claimed Buddy had inspired her to create the space, remembering how he had led them to those crucial historical documents. As if hearing his name in their thoughts, Buddy's ears perked up. He rose from his spot near the playing children and trotted toward the site's main gate. Moments later, a familiar black SUV appeared, but this time it brought friends. Rebecca Chen stepped out, accompanied by federal agents carrying boxes of documents. "More evidence keeps surfacing," Rebecca explained, joining the group. "Other communities across the country are coming forward with similar stories. What started here has sparked a national investigation into corporate practices and community exploitation." Helen watched as Buddy greeted Rebecca with a friendly tail wag before returning to his self-appointed guard duty. "He knew, didn't he?" she mused. Somehow, he knew exactly what needed to happen, who needed to be brought together. "The interesting thing," Rebecca added, lowering her voice, "is that we've been tracking similar cases across the country, and in several of them, witnesses mentioned a dog, different breeds, different descriptions, but always a stray who appeared when help was needed most, who led people to evidence or brought protectors together." They all turned to look at Buddy, who sat regally among the playing children. His presence both ordinary and extraordinary. Could it be possible? Were there others like him, silent guardians working to right wrongs and protect the innocent? Judge Martinez, who had become a regular visitor to the community, emerged from her car carrying a special document. "It's official," she announced, holding up the paper. The state has established a permanent oversight committee to prevent similar corporate conspiracies. They're calling it the Guardian Initiative, inspired by a certain four-legged friend. Cody ran to his mother, his face bright with excitement. "Buddy's famous," he declared proudly. The dog responded by gently nuzzling the boy's hand, seemingly uninterested in fame or recognition. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the construction site as community members gathered for their weekly meeting. The agenda included plans for new small businesses, educational programs, and community support services. But beyond the practical discussions, there was something more powerful happening. People were connecting, sharing, healing together. "You know what amazes me most," Louise remarked, watching the scene unfold. "It's not just the buildings being restored or the money being returned. It's the way people look at each other now, with trust, with hope. That's Buddy's real miracle." Helen nodded, remembering those dark days in the condemned building when a mysterious dog would appear with food and comfort. "He gave us back our faith in goodness," she said softly. "He showed us we weren't alone." As the meeting continued, Buddy made his rounds, moving from group to group as if ensuring everyone was included, everyone was heard. His presence had become a symbol of the community's resilience and unity, a reminder that sometimes help comes in the most unexpected forms. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, its light reflecting off the new windows of the community center. Inside and outside the building, people worked together, planned together, hoped together. The wounds of betrayal were healing, replaced by something stronger, a community that had learned to trust again, to fight for justice, and to believe in miracles that walked on four legs. And through it all, Buddy watched, his mission continuing in ways only he truly understood. He had brought light to darkness, hope to despair, and justice to those who needed it most. But perhaps his greatest achievement was showing that in a world often divided by fear and greed, love and courage could still triumph, especially when guided by a mysterious guardian with knowing eyes and a heart full of wisdom. 1 year after the fateful day in the landfill, the transformed community gathered for a special celebration. The former mill site, now a thriving community center, was hosting its grand opening ceremony. Colorful banners fluttered in the spring breeze, and the sounds of music and laughter filled the air. Helen stood at the podium, Cody by her side and Buddy at their feet, addressing the assembled crowd. Her voice, once timid and afraid, now rang with confidence and hope. "A year ago, I thought I had lost everything," she began, looking out at the faces of her friends and neighbors. "I was hiding in the shadows, afraid for my son, afraid for our future. But then something extraordinary happened. A guardian angel appeared in the form of a stray dog, and he changed everything." The crowd's attention shifted to Buddy, who sat with his usual dignified calm, accepting their recognition with graceful modesty. Children from the community had made him a special collar for the occasion, decorated with small golden wings. "Today, we're not just celebrating a new building," Helen continued. "We're celebrating justice, community, and the mysterious ways that hope finds us when we need it most. Thanks to everyone here, Tom and Sarah, Diana and her team, Louise, and so many others, we've turned a story of corruption into a testament to the power of unity and truth." The community center had become more than just a building. Its walls now housed dreams and opportunities, a state-of-the-art job training facility, childcare center, community health clinic, and education programs. The recovered funds had been carefully invested in the community's future, creating sustainable programs that would benefit generations to come. Tom stepped forward to share the latest news. "The Guardian Initiative has already identified and stopped similar schemes in 12 other cities," he announced. "The pattern we exposed here has led to nationwide reforms in corporate accountability and community protection." Sarah added her own update about the community's progress. "Our job training programs have helped over 300 people find new careers. Small businesses are returning to downtown, and for the first time in decades, young people are choosing to stay in Gary and be part of its renaissance." Louise, who had expanded her bookstore into a cultural center, shared how the community's story had inspired others. "We've had visitors from across the country," she said, "all wanting to learn how we did it. But the truth is, we had help from an extraordinary source. She smiled at Buddy, who wagged his tail in response. Judge Martinez, who had become a champion for community rights, spoke about the legal reforms that had emerged from the case. The laws we've enacted ensure that no corporation can ever again systematically destroy communities for profit. We call them the Buddy laws, because sometimes the best guardians of justice come with 4 legs and a tail. As the ceremony continued, Diana shared an intriguing discovery. We've been collecting stories from other communities that experienced similar transformations. In each case, there are reports of a mysterious dog who appeared just when hope seemed lost. Different breeds, different places, but always the same pattern. A canine guardian leading people to truth and justice. Cody, now a confident 3-year-old, moved to stand by Buddy. He's magic, he stated simply, with the unwavering faith of a child. The crowd chuckled, but there was wonder in their laughter, a recognition that sometimes the most profound truths come from the youngest hearts. As the celebration moved into the evening, the community gathered for a feast that showcased their renewed spirit. Tables groaned with dishes from every cultural tradition represented in Gary, shared in the spirit of unity that had become their hallmark. Helen watched as Buddy made his rounds, greeting everyone, accepting gentle pats and offering his calm presence to any who seemed to need it. She noticed how he lingered, near those who were hurting or worried, somehow knowing who needed comfort most. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the renewed landscape of their community, something remarkable happened. Buddy, who had been playing with the children, suddenly stood alert, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Following his gaze, they saw another dog, a beautiful shepherd mix, watching from the edge of the property. The stranger's presence seemed to carry meaning that only Buddy understood. He turned to Cody and Helen, touching each of them gently with his nose, then walked a few steps toward the other dog. The message was clear. His work here was complete. "He's leaving, isn't he?" Cody asked, his voice small but understanding. Helen knelt beside her son, holding him close as they watched their guardian make his choice. "There are other people who need him now," she explained softly. "Other communities that need their own angel." The crowd fell silent, witnessing this unexpected moment. Buddy looked back one last time, his eyes filled with that same mysterious wisdom that had guided them all along. Then, with dignified grace, he joined the waiting shepherd, and together they disappeared into the gathering dusk. But this wasn't an ending. It was a continuation. The love, courage, and hope that Buddy had awakened in their community would live on. His legacy wasn't just in the buildings restored or the justice served, but in the hearts he had helped heal and the spirits he had lifted. As night fell over Gary, stars began to twinkle above the community center. Inside and out, people continued to celebrate, share stories, and plan for the future. They had learned that sometimes angels walk among us on 4 legs, appearing when needed most, teaching us to believe in miracles and in each other. And somewhere out there, a remarkable dog continued his mission, seeking other communities in need of hope, other hearts in need of healing, other truths waiting to be revealed. For wherever darkness threatened to overwhelm light, wherever justice needed a guardian, a mysterious friend would appear, leading the way back to hope. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Cody, Helen, and the extraordinary Buddy has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories about hope, courage, and the angels that appear in our lives when we need them most. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to your comments about what was the most touching moment of this story for you.